which is like the dude from Queens who eats wheat cakes, or at least when Aunt May fixed them for him. There's this sort of wonderful, dark, shadowy aspect to things. Also, Ben Reilly, the clone, is also a doppelganger. So there's a sense of eeriness there. Now, when you see Ben Reilly, you usually haven't read the Clone Wars. I've seen bits of it, and I've seen Chasm recently, which is a manifestation of Ben Reilly. Doppelgangers are inherently uncanny. Like it's you, but it's not you. Well, who is it? How different is this version of me? Are they evil? What's going on? It's a traditionally sort of literarily unsettling thing. Weaving over into more high weirdness. So that's Aleister Crowley in the Egyptian getup. Aleister Crowley was a magician. He reveled in his weird reputation as the evilest man in the world. That was a tabloid for me called him that. Very interesting thing here if you're into magic, which is one of the things I'm into, which is where this whole thing is coming from. Anyway, he channeled a text from this thing in the middle called AWAS. And that guy on the right is Jack Parsons, no relation. He was a rocket scientist who founded JPL. And Parsons knew Crowley, was sort of anointed by him, and Parsons did this weird ritual in the desert with L. Ron Hubbard. L. Ron Hubbard learned how to do a hierarchical cult from Crowley, because Crowley was from the Victorian era where they had these sort of hierarchical cults of initiation. That's the story anyway. And after this, Parsons and Crowley did this. After this, the legend has it, of course, is that the Roswell crash happened. So the idea is the Babylon worked, and it brought something in from the outside. Carl Jung wrote about flying saucers. This is from a 1958 book. We have Betty and Barney Hill over here. They had a classic abduction experience that was written about years after Spider-Man debuted, because I'm actually going to sort of obviously riff on Spider-Man's face, and the mask, and these sort of images. Anyway, they lost time, all of these things. They were fiddled around with by these strange gray creatures with these weird eyes that were sort of almond-shaped and went up at the side. This wasn't in the public knowledge, so it doesn't align with Spider-Man, but if you look at the Jung book and AWAS and this sort of idea of creatures with strange eyes, it's kind of cool. There's like resonances there, I think, and of course Spider-Man is pretty unique, the mask, it's just, Black Panther has his face covered, but that's cool. But Spider-Man, there's something just weird about the eyes and funky. So I'm sort of, pointing out that Ultraman also comes along in the same period. Again, Betty and Barney Hill's experiences aren't publicized, I think, until 65 or 66. This whole sort of face, this idea, becomes hugely globally famous with Communion in 1988. But if you were part of probably fandom or conspiracy culture ufology, you already knew this idea. So that's a sort of, is that a Jungian synchronicity? Oops, sorry. I advanced. That's Betty and Barney Hill, that's King's book, and that's the sketch they drew, sorry. So yeah, and here we have, it's what you get when you reverse Spider-Man's mask, which is sort of like a green alien. It's kind of more of a sherbet color. And then as soon as I'd sent this in, I think this comic book from the Fall of X-Men franchise was announced. It's called The Uncanny Spider-Man, which I really wish it had occurred to me to call the Uncanny Spider-Man. As you can see, here's Kurt Wagner, who's an X-Man. He has a tail, if you don't know who he is, and pointy ears. He's kind of a demonic character, but he's very nice. But he has these sort of alarming eyes. They're glowing. It's the Spider-Man eyes. He's actually borrowed the suit from Peter Parker. And he is alarming people in Central Park while he's protecting mutants. Fever dreams, very strange things. As you pointed out, Fever is an amazing story where Spider-Man's soul is sucked into this weird universe, lorded over by this sort of spider god. He's like a shaman king. He's also like a Loa. He rides all these other creatures. Aleister Crowley is in this thing, mixed in there. There's all of this stuff. You don't need to know it to enjoy it. But this thing is by Brendan McCarthy, who is really crazy. He's a sort of like he's not an heir to Ditko, but he loves Ditko. So he does all of these weird universes of psychedelic sort of horror and also delight. If you haven't read this book, it's worth tracking down. I think it's a little expensive out of print, but I don't know if it's digitally available. But that's super cool. More of these sort of Jungian sort of dream, this whole thing is just this fever dream. It's just insane, and it weaves in all kinds of things from the Spider-Man mythos, and it's just fabulous and odd. Brendan McCarthy, just to place him further, he designed Mad Max Fury Road, and he actually told the story visually, and then they wrote a script on it. So you can see Spider-Man at the bottom there, looks a little like a Fury Road character. Also, we see the Inheritors, it's Morland's family. That's also this whole realm of strangeness. I think it was the first Spider-Verse story or the second one where you meet Morland's family. Morland is an energy vampire who eats spider totems. So hauntology is this academic idea that's been around. I think Derrida sort of proposed it many years ago. People have been in like folk horror circles, academic circles have picked up on it. Spider-Man also can be seen through the lens of hauntology. Here he is, of course, he's being called a freak and a public menace right from the beginning. That must be a really difficult thing for him. There's this adventure, of course, where he has 6 arms, which again is weird and uncanny and strange. And there's Venom. Obviously, his doppelganger. I would argue that he's sort of a better doppelganger than Ben Reilly. Not better, but just different, because he's the dark one. Ben Reilly isn't really dark. Ben Reilly, is good at heart. So he's this character. He's obviously, I had a panel in here also with him remembering Ben and also Gwen. So he's haunted by that, obviously. But he's haunted, he's haunted, sorry, I lost my place. Just the definition is, of hauntology is to be haunted, doubled, shadowed, monstered, and othered. So that's Peter. He's othered at high school. He's got doubles. He's got shadow issues to deal with, and he's haunted. Not necessarily in a bad way, because he always, as other panelists have pointed out, he triumphs. He triumphs over all the little things, but even all this weird stuff, this sort of undercurrents, he still triumphs. So while the wild interconnected universe created by Steve Ditko, Jack Kirby, Stan Lee, and many others is abundant with every kind of strange being from folklore, fantasy, horror, and science fiction, somehow Spider-Man is subtly, perhaps, the most phantasmagorical of all, the quietly strange, uncanny alien masquerading as the boy next door. And that's my TED Talk.
Awesome. We really appreciate this perspective here. We're going to open it up to the floor. So if our speakers could just stay here for some quick questions and comments. Do we have any questions or comments? Yes.
Do either of you were there any particular moments in the media, whether it was like the original 60s show that you mentioned, or the films that really spoke to you in regards to the hauntology or the sort of spooky, supernatural, creepy elements that you thought really spoke to what you were talking about today?
For me, I had never watched the cartoons until very recently. I don't remember it. But I always remember, they stuck in my mind. I must have been 3 when I watched them. And I did watch some of them, and it triggered this sense of eeriness. It felt strange to me. Like, it was familiar. His voice was totally familiar. It was like listening to a relative. That voice was instantly recognizable, and everything about it was recognizable. But there's this weird space and emptiness. There's this absence in there, and there are these weird sort of dark skies. Everything that I watched seemed weird, right? So that kind of kicked it off. Actually, I did look at some stills from the cartoon. So there's one with the Fly Brothers, who look kind of like Venom because they're all, they don't have the chest emblem. They're dark. And there's 2 Fly Brothers. They're like doppelgangers. There was all these little sort of coincidences like that kind of connected the past to the present.
Yeah, I mean, I guess for me, like, not as many as I wish there were. I think, like, in terms of connecting Spider-Man to horror and doing this presentation, I found that's really best served on the page so far. I did talk about, like, there's obviously the Doc Ock scene in Spider-Man 2, which is just, like, if you're an Evil Dead fan, that scene is just, like, pure glee. Like, 2 minutes ago, oh my god, this is what we wanted, like, this is what we were hoping Raimi would do, you know? And I keep hoping we'll see more of that. I think we will, you know, the previous panel talked about how with more versions of Spider-Man, we're going to see Spider-Man media expanding even more. And I think just recently, because the superhero cinematic boom is starting to maybe collapse a little bit, I think you're starting to see people realize we need to open up the genre space a little bit more and start not just telling the same kind of stories, and maybe we'll see them. I do think with Spider-Man movies in particular, and even the cartoons, have kind of been locked into one mode for like a really long time, and maybe they'll start experimenting a little bit more, and maybe like they can get into more of the horror. But yeah, I mean, like in general, I talked about a little bit in my presentation. Almost all of Spider-Man's rogues gallery are classic Universal monsters, right? To a certain degree, they're all people who've been transformed too. They're all tragic figures who've been turned into monsters. So on just a base level, it's there. But I do wish that the media went into like the scary, spooky side of Spider-Man more often, for sure.
Yeah, I wonder, like, the new Spider-Man, the new Miles Morales Spider-Man, I thought it was tremendous, and I went and talked to my fellow nerds at the library, and I said, this changes everything. The first movie obviously did, and it was fantastic, but this movie, the way its palette of styles is astonishing, and I'm like, you can't do that in film. Mm-hmm. You can't do any of this in film. The Marvel movies I love them, but they look staid in comparison. I was like, this thing with Hobie and just the way he moves, and then sometimes he's like flat and sometimes he's not, and it was just so full of energy and craziness, and I think it would be perfect. You know, you could see a world where they went, well, let's do these movies instead. Obviously, they're much more labor intensive, right? But let's do some kind of crazy horror movie.
And I guess I will slay, now that you bring it up, I guess I will slightly contradict myself in saying the Prowler sequences in the Spider-Verse movies, I think, are actually kind of scary, especially for like younger viewers. Mm-hmm. And then like the Daniel Pemberton Prowler theme, which is like one of my favorite pieces of music in any movie. Like, you know, like that's actually a pretty creepy like theme song. Like those sequences, I think, can be pretty harrowing.
Great comments. We've got a few more here, and then here. Yeah.
Okay, for Trevor, do you think the Spider-Man growing 6 arms in the 70s, I guess beginning with Spider-Man 100, is that a good representation of body horror to you?
Yeah, I think so. Like I said, like in terms of like body horror, it's like anytime you're about like the body is disrupted, it's something else like kind of emerges. I think that's, you know, like body horror. I don't think there's just one kind of body horror. Any kind of horror, there's not just one type of it. But I mean, Spider-Man is already so close to being body horror, right? Like even the Raimi films, you see he's got like the little Spidey, like I don't even know what to call it, but like his body is changing, his body is growing. To disrupt and suddenly have 6 arms, and then to go even further into things like Man Spider and everything, for sure. I think Spider-Man is one of the most body horror characters we have, honestly. And they, I mean, like I said, they don't go dark with it all the time, but it's there for sure.
There's also a character in one of the Spider-Verse stories that's fairly recent called Man of Spiders. Has anyone seen this guy? I didn't read too deeply into it. The deadline to the essay approached him. I just leave him out. But he's I don't know what his origin is, but he's made of spiders. He's kind of like Swamp Thing. He's a man who's made of muck, but it's spiders, and that's just really completely freaky too.
And we did a question here.
So when you're going through the pictures, when you showed the reverse picture of Spider-Man's mask, all I saw was a luchador mask from like Mexicans. And I just can't help but see the similarities. Do you have any context of that? Or do you see any connection?
I mean, it makes total sense. There's an amazing magazine called the Fortean Times, which is all about UFOs, strange stuff. I see some people nodding. It's from Britain. It's been around forever. Amazing resource. You can get it at Barnes & Noble, I think. The distribution's a bit spotty in America, but Barnes & Noble carries it. And I posted on a website, because I was like, I'm sure I've heard somebody talk about Spider-Man's face in terms of grays, and I couldn't find it. I found like one thing, and I was like, damn, nobody's written about this. I can't quote them. I'll just have to blather. And so somebody posted that, and I was like, oh, that's nice. I'll use it. But yeah, it does look a lot like that. So you know, that's very interesting.
Well, really quickly to connect to that, like they're like a big part of luchador culture, though. Also, it does have like a horror and like a connection, because in Mexico, a lot of the luchadors starred in like horror movies, like Santos versus the
Santos.
And,
I used to read that when I was a kid. Yeah, there was a supernatural, metaphysical aspect to it.
Yeah, they riff on that idea in Hellboy. Richard Corbin, like one of the great horror illustrators, did a Hellboy story. Several of them with the rest of us.
Question there.
So you both talked about one of the spooky aspects of Spider-Man, where cores, how does the Comics Code Authority influence the kind of history of that and how it's progressed as it's become obsolete and it's no longer moving?
Yeah, I mean, I think, comics in general, and especially superhero comics, definitely it seems like each decade are willing to push those boundaries a little bit more. I mean, I talked about how, like, to me, the horror of Spider-Man really started being, like, a little bit more apparent with Craven's Last Hunt. I was trying to, like, just kind of rush the things that I didn't mention. How Craven's Last Hunt felt like kind of a natural continuation of what was happening in the 80s with, The Dark Knight Returns and Batman Year One. So, and Watchmen, right? We're starting to see comics go darker, and you started to see the publishers and all, like, just the Comic Code Authority in general be a little more lax. And I think that's just continued. I think the ultimate example of that for me was the Carnage panels I showed. And like I said, I had other Carnage panels where I was like, I don't know if I want to use them. I don't think Carnage as a character would exist back in the 60s or 70s when the Comics Code was definitely more stringent. I think Carnage is a benefit of the Comic Codes being more hands-off, and eventually the publishers just being like, we don't even need to worry about it anymore, we're not going to use it. So yeah, it's horror, anything with horror. We know what the Comics Code did to horror comics in the 50s. We know they pretty much wiped that out as an industry. Anytime that starts to get more lax or go away, it's only going to benefit these kinds of stories.
Yeah, you couldn't even have done the Spider-Man meets Dracula. I mean, the comics code was so stringent.
Yeah,
you couldn't do vampires,
you couldn't have
do
vampires.
zombies. So I don't know if they had a. They probably would have frowned on the body horror, but it's interesting because I think Stanley was involved with the comics code at the beginning, and he's the one that challenged it with the Peter story with the drug story.
Yeah, amazing.
The drug
90s,
story.
96
And
through
challenged
98.
it, and then you think he did it again at some point. So that's something. That's one in Stan's corner. You know, he may have set it up and gone along with everyone else, but he saw that there was a need to break away from it. It was just way too constrictive.
Real quick, just one last quick comment, because we do want to get into our next speaker. Thank you.
Do you think like the general popularity of Spider-Man is related to just like the grittiness of it? Because something I think we've all noticed is that people in general, like, it's eerie and it makes you feel uncomfortable, but you cannot look away. So do you think that's added to like his just huge popularity?
I'm gonna say yes, but I'm also like a monster kid, right? And I have this like theory that like kids just love monsters and kids love spooky stuff more than like parents sometimes want to admit. And I think there's Batman is like probably the darkest character. There's the most obvious horror elements, like his clothes and everything. And that's a very popular character as well. I think the underlying eeriness of Spider-Man for sure appeals to kids because it's the fun version of a monster story, right? It's the more optimistic, positive version.
Well, if it was essentially 1973, the tablecloth there could be your Halloween costume.
One of those little plastic masks in the bed. Like, it would probably be like a Spider-Man cover, like a shirt or something.
I actually went to get a glass of water before this, and I was pouring it out, and I swear, I did a little jolt because there was a spider on the table, and it was one of these. I was like, silly. So.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. And we will be starting with our keynote speaker here around 11:20 is kind of like our goal, and we just give folks a quick minute to stretch your legs. And this is a presentation folks will not want to miss.
If you think you have a lot of Spider-Man stuff, you don't compared to Bruce. And we do have some. Even if you weren't a presenter, if you'd like, we'd have some water and some lemonade and some bagels and things left. So please take something. Please eat.